At my father's 60th birthday dinner at a five-star Chicago steakhouse, my mother laughed in my face and told everyone to ignore me because I was nothing. Then the heavy mahogany doors swung open, and my attorney walked into the dining room holding a federal court order. Every head in the restaurant turned as he announced he was there to seize the family empire. My parents thought they were trapping me, but they had no idea I was the one who built the cage. My name is Nora. I am 34 years old and I work as a forensic accountant tracking missing money and financial fraud. For years, my family treated me like a failure because I refused to join my father's shady real estate company. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth. The heavy leather folder landed with a soft, expensive thud on the pristine white tablecloth. The waiter offered a tight professional smile before stepping back into the shadows of the VIP room at the Monarch. $8,500. My mother, Catherine, did not even glance at the gold embossed receipt. She simply placed her French manicured index finger on the leather and slid it across the table until it hit my water glass. "Go ahead, Nora," Catherine purred, taking a delicate sip of her expensive champagne. "You have been sitting here all night, eating our food, contributing absolutely nothing to the conversation. You have been running that little accounting office of yours for 5 years now. It is time you prove you are not just a parasite. Pay the bill." The table went dead silent. Next to me, my sister Brittany adjusted her diamond tennis bracelet, a smirk playing on her lips. "Mom, do not embarrass her," Brittany said, though her tone dripped with theatrical pity. "You know Nora's firm is barely scraping by. She drove here in a 10-year-old Honda. They do not let you valet that out front, do they, Nora? Did you have to park in the public garage?" I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. From the head of the table, my father, Richard, did not even look up from his phone. "If she cannot pay it, she should not have ordered the Wagyu," he muttered. That was when Jamal leaned forward. Jamal is Brittany's husband. He is a sharp, ambitious black African-American man who had clawed his way into luxury real estate only to be entirely consumed by my family's toxic vanity. He wore a custom designer suit and a smug expression that he had perfected since marrying my sister. "Hey, let us not make the accountant sweat." Jamal chuckled, his deep voice carrying across the quiet room. He dramatically pulled back his cuff to reveal a brand-new luxury watch. "I got this, Richard. Consider it an early birthday gift from your favorite son-in-law. I just closed a $5 million deal this morning using the family trust fund. Paying for a steak dinner is literally pocket change at this point." Jamal tossed a black premium credit card onto the table. Catherine beamed at him as if he were a god descending from the heavens. "Thank you, Jamal," Catherine said, shooting me a glare of pure venom. "It is so refreshing to have a child who actually understands success, who contributes to the legacy of this family instead of draining it." I looked at the black card resting on the table. Then I slowly looked up and met Jamal's eyes. "A $5 million deal," I repeated quietly. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the aggressive energy radiating from them. "Let me guess. The commercial complex down on the south side." Jamal puffed out his chest. "Exactly. Prime location. Brittany and I are using the commission to put a down payment on that massive estate in Lake Forest." "That is fascinating," I said, leaning forward just a fraction. "And did you wire the funds directly from the family trust? Or did you route it through the offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the one registered under the shell corporation Apex Holdings?" Jamal's confident smile faltered. His brow furrowed in confusion. "What offshore account?" "The funds came from Richard's domestic escrow." I turned my gaze to my sister. Brittany's face had suddenly drained of color. The smug smirk was completely gone, replaced by a rigid, terrified mask. "Did they?" "Brittany?" I asked softly. Did you tell your husband that the $5 million he just legally bound himself to is not from Dad's escrow account? Did you tell him that you and Dad have been washing money through Apex Holdings for the last 3 years, and that by signing as the broker today, Jamal just made himself an accessory to federal wire fraud? Shut your mouth, Nora! Brittany screeched, her voice cracking violently. She slammed her hands on the table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. I watched the crystal wine glasses shake against the white tablecloth as Brittany glared at me. Her chest was heaving, and her manicured nails dug into the linen. You are completely delusional. Nora? Brittany sneered, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You have been making up these insane stories since we were kids, just to get attention. Jamal, please do not listen to her. She is just bitter because her own life is a miserable failure and she cannot stand to see us happy. Jamal looked back and forth between us. His hand was still hovering over his premium credit card. He was an aggressive broker, but he was not stupid. The phrase federal wire fraud had clearly spooked him. Brittany. What is she talking about? Jamal asked, his voice losing its arrogance. Is there an offshore account or not? Why would she know about a Cayman Islands account if it did not exist? Before Brittany could formulate another lie, my father slammed his massive fist onto the table. The sound cracked through the private dining room like a gunshot, making the silverware jump. That is enough, Richard bellowed, his face flushing a dangerous shade of purple. I will not sit here and allow my birthday dinner to be hijacked by the jealous ravings of a spiteful child. You will show some respect, Nora. You are speaking to your family. The people who put a roof over your head. At that exact moment, the heavy mahogany doors creaked open. The waiter stepped into the room holding a silver tray, looking completely terrified by the thick tension in the air. He hesitated, but my mother waved him over with an impatient flick of her wrist. Bring us a bottle of the Louis Roederer Cristal, Catherine commanded, without even looking at the young man. The 2008 vintage. My poor Brittany is visibly shaken by this ridiculous outburst, and she needs something to calm her nerves. She has been working so incredibly hard on this new deal, and she deserves to celebrate. The waiter nodded quickly, his hands trembling slightly, and for the rest of the table, Madame, he asked nervously. Catherine finally turned her cold gaze toward me. Her eyes traveled up and down my simple navy dress, taking in my lack of designer jewelry. Just bring my eldest daughter another glass of tap water, Catherine said, her voice dripping with pure condescension. She is not celebrating anything tonight. Do not waste the good champagne on someone who cannot appreciate it. The waiter scurried away, leaving the heavy silence to settle over us once more. It was the exact same dynamic we had lived out 1,000 times before. Brittany was the golden child who always needed to be soothed with luxury, while I was the outcast who deserved nothing but scraps. For years, that blatant favoritism would have crushed my spirit. I would have lowered my head and swallowed the humiliation just to keep the family peace. But tonight, the tap water comment did not sting at all. It just confirmed everything I already knew. Richard straightened his custom suit jacket and cleared his throat forcefully. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a stack of legal documents. He tossed them onto the center of the table, right next to Jamal's credit card. The thick paper landed with a heavy, solid thud. Your mother's right, Richard said, his tone shifting from pure rage to a calculated business voice. You have contributed absolutely nothing to this family, Nora. But tonight you are going to make yourself useful for once. I am retiring. As of next Monday, I am transferring 100% of the voting shares of Williams Commercial Real Estate over to Brittany and Jamal. They will take over as co-chief executive officers of the operation. Jamal's eyes widened with surprise and sudden raw greed. The hesitation he had shown just moments ago vanished completely, replaced by the intense allure of total control over the family empire. Brittany let out a forced, breathless laugh and clapped her hands together. Oh, Daddy, thank you, she squeaked, shooting a triumphant look in my direction. However, Richard continued, his eyes locking onto mine like heat-seeking missiles. When I set up the company 30 years ago, I put 5% of the honorary shares in your name, Nora. A massive mistake I made when I still thought you had potential. I need those shares back immediately to make the transfer to Brittany legally seamless. He pulled a gold pen from his pocket and tapped it aggressively against the thick paper. Sign the waiver, Nora. You relinquish your 5% and sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. I stared at the gold pen resting on the thick stack of legal documents. My father was looking at me with the absolute certainty of a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He fully expected me to pick up that pen and sign away the only leverage I had left just to keep the peace. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Jamal decided it was his moment to play the alpha male. Jamal stood up from his chair, pushing it back so hard it scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He leaned his tall, muscular frame over the table, placing both of his large hands flat on the white linen. He positioned himself directly across from me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. The shiny face of his new luxury watch caught the light from the chandelier above us. "You heard your father," Nora Jamal said, his deep voice dropping an octave into a warning growl. "Stop playing these stupid games and sign the paper. You are embarrassing yourself and you are ruining this dinner. Do not make this harder than it has to be. You do not belong in this business, so just take your name off the documents and walk away quietly." I did not shrink back. I did not avert my eyes. I simply leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and looked right through him. "You talk a really big game about luxury real estate, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly steady and clear. "You love parading around this restaurant acting like you are a titan of industry. But you seem to forget what I do for a living. I am a forensic accountant. I do not just look at numbers. I look at the truth hiding behind them." Jamal's jaw tightened. He tried to maintain his intimidating glare, but I could see a brief flicker of uncertainty in his dark eyes. "Just sign the damn paper," he repeated gruffly. "I ran the numbers on your boutique brokerage last week." I continued, ignoring his command entirely. "You boast about selling luxury mansions, but your agency takes a massive 60% split on all your commissions. You claim you are pulling in millions, but after your broker split the federal taxes, the state taxes, and your exorbitant monthly desk fees, you are barely clearing a low six-figure income." "Shut up," Jamal snapped, glancing nervously at Brittany, who was now staring at him with wide, confused eyes. "I am just getting started," I replied calmly. "That custom designer suit you are wearing right now? You put that on a high-interest rewards credit card that is currently maxed out at $45,000. Your minimum monthly payment barely covers the interest. That brand new luxury watch you just shoved in my face to pay for this dinner, you did not buy that with cash. You financed it through a third-party jeweler at a predatory 22% interest rate." "Nora, that is enough," my mother, Catherine, hissed, but her voice lacked its usual venom. She was too busy looking at Jamal in absolute horror. "It is not enough," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the heavy air of the room. "You are leasing a high-end sports car you cannot even afford to park in your own luxury building, Jamal. You are not a wealthy mogul. You are a broke man wearing expensive clothes, drowning in over $200,000 of unsecured consumer debt. The only reason you are so desperate to close the shady $5 million deal for my father is because your own bank is threatening foreclosure on your current condo." Jamal's face went completely gray. His tough guy facade shattered into a million pieces. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Brittany, whose face was now completely flushed with rage and extreme embarrassment. "Foreclosure!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Jamal, what is she talking about? You told me our mortgage was paid through the end of the year. You told me we were rich." "She is lying," Jamal stammered, taking a step back from the table. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You lying little witch. I am going to ruin you for saying this." Jamal raised his voice so loud that the commotion spilled out of our private room. The heavy mahogany doors had not been fully closed by the waiter. Through the gap, I could see several wealthy patrons at the adjacent tables stop eating. Forks were lowered. Wine glasses were placed back on the pristine tablecloths. Wealthy Chicago socialites and business executives were twisting in their seats, craning their necks to watch the wealthy Williams family implode in real time. The whispers started rippling through the elegant dining room. Richard suddenly realized we were creating a massive public spectacle. He slammed both of his hands on the table, rattling the plates. "Keep your voice down, Jamal," my father hissed furiously, his eyes darting toward the open door. "People are watching us. Do not let this ungrateful girl get under your skin. We handle our business quietly." But Jamal was too humiliated to be quiet. His pride had been publicly butchered. He turned his anger back on me. "You think you are so smart, Nora," he sneered, taking another aggressive step toward me. "You think knowing a few numbers makes you powerful? You are nothing. You are sitting here drinking tap water while we run a multi-million-dollar empire. You will sign that paper today, or I swear I will make sure you never work in this city again." "Lower your finger, Jamal," I said, coldly, holding his gaze without a single ounce of fear. "I am not intimidated by a man who cannot even afford his own lifestyle. Unless you want me to pull up the public records of your defaulted loans right here on my phone for the whole restaurant to see, I suggest you sit back down. You are a fraud. And the worst part is, you married into a family of frauds, thinking you had hit the jackpot. You all deserve each other." Jamal sank back into his heavy leather chair, his face a mask of pure defeat. He did not say another word. The aggressive fight had been completely drained out of him. He stared blankly at his cold steak. Brittany stared at her husband in horrified silence, finally realizing the luxurious life she thought she had was nothing but a fragile house of cards ready to collapse at any moment. The tension in the private dining room was thick enough to cut with a knife. The soft jazz music playing from the hidden overhead speakers suddenly felt completely out of place against the heavy atmosphere of our table. But my father Richard was a man who never backed down from a losing hand. He simply changed the rules of the game to ensure he always maintained the upper hand. Richard reached across the white linen tablecloth and snatched the heavy gold pen that had rolled away during Jamal's loud outburst. He tapped the expensive metal against the thick stack of legal documents, once again forcing the attention back to his personal agenda. He completely ignored the massive revelation that his favored son-in-law was functionally bankrupt and drowning in massive consumer debt. In Richard's calculated corporate world, if you did not acknowledge a problem verbally, it simply did not exist. He was a master at controlling the narrative, and right now he needed to regain absolute control of this dinner. "Let us get back to the matter at hand," Richard said, his voice dropping into a smooth diplomatic tone that he usually reserved for intense city council meetings and hostile zoning board hearings. He smoothed his expensive imported silk tie and leaned forward, projecting the carefully crafted image of a weary but benevolent family patriarch. "You have made your little point, Nora. You have embarrassed your sister and you have thoroughly humiliated Jamal in public. I hope you got whatever petty vindication you were looking for tonight. Now it is time to act like a mature adult and do what is best for the overall Williams family legacy." He slid the dense stack of legal documents an inch closer to my water glass. "I told you earlier that I am retiring, Nora. But you do not seem to grasp the absolute gravity of what that actually means for all of us. I have spent 40 consecutive years building Williams commercial real estate from a single dirty rented office in a rundown suburban strip mall into a massive cornerstone of the Chicago business community. I have sacrificed my physical health, my personal time, and my peace of mind to ensure that this family never has to worry about money. I am stepping down right now because it is finally time to pass the torch. I want to see my life work thrive in the hands of the next capable generation before I am too old to enjoy the beautiful view from the top." He gestured expansively toward Brittany, who was still glaring furiously at Jamal, and then he pointed his finger back to me. "I am handing them a pristine corporate empire," Richard continued, his cold eyes fixed firmly on me. but a major transition of power requires absolute structural unity. The corporate board of directors needs to see a completely united front from the founding family. Our major financial investors need to know there are no loose ends holding us back. Your 5% honorary stake is a dangerous loose end, Nora. It is a silly technicality from a bygone era, but it severely complicates the upcoming legal restructuring. I stared at him, letting his highly practiced speech wash over me. He sounded so incredibly reasonable and measured. He sounded exactly like a loving father making a tough but necessary business decision for the ultimate good of his children. If I did not already know the dark financial truth hiding in his ledgers, I might have actually believed his performance. You are asking me to voluntarily give up my only legal tie to the family business, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. A massive business I actually helped audit when I was still a student in college. A business I know inside and out, despite your constant efforts to keep me entirely marginalized. I am asking you to keep the family united, Richard countered smoothly, without missing a single beat. He leaned in closer across the table, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were two high-powered corporate executives closing a massive corporate merger. Look at your younger sister, Nora. Look at the immense emotional stress she is under right now. Do you really want to hold her entire financial future hostage over a meaningless 5% share? You have your own little accounting practice downtown. You have chosen your distinct professional path, and we have always respected that choice. Now we are simply asking you to respect ours. Sign the legal document. Relinquish the honorary shares today. Walk away with a totally clean conscience. He forcefully flipped to the very last page of the thick legal packet, revealing a line of bright blue tape marking exactly where I was supposed to sign my name. I looked past the tape and carefully read the bold header of the page. It was not just a simple transfer of shares. It was a comprehensive corporate waiver of liability. This is not just a standard stock transfer, Dad. I pointed out, running my index finger over the dense legal jargon printed on the premium paper. This specific clause right here indemnifies the current corporate officers from any past financial irregularities. You are asking me to sign a binding legal document saying I will never sue you or hold you accountable for any actions taken during your long tenure as Chief Executive Officer. Standard corporate boilerplate. Richard dismissed, waving his large hand casually as if swatting away a minor annoyance. My expensive corporate lawyers absolutely insisted on it. It legally protects everyone during the complex transition period. It is just a basic formality to ensure a clean slate for Brittany and Jamal as they take the reins. A clean slate, I echoed, allowing a small, humorless smile to touch my lips. That is a very interesting choice of words, Dad. You want a clean slate. You want a beautifully united family. And all it costs is my signature on a document that completely shields you from any future legal discovery. Richard narrowed his eyes, his benevolent patriarch mask slipping just a fraction to reveal the ruthless corporate shark hiding underneath. Do not overcomplicate this simple transaction, Nora. I am your father. I am asking you to do this one simple thing to protect the massive legacy I built for us. We are a family, and a family protects each other. No matter what happens, a family must remain completely loyal. You owe me this signature, Nora. I did not reach for the pen. I just sat there looking at the man who had spent my entire childhood treating my existence like a bad return on investment. The silence stretched between us thick and heavy. When my father realized his intimidation tactics were completely failing, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He opened his mouth to shout, but my mother suddenly intervened. Catherine let out a long, dramatic sigh and reached her hand across the table. She completely ignored the thick tension in the room and rested her perfectly manicured fingers on top of my arm. Her diamond rings felt cold against my skin. I immediately pulled my arm back out of her reach. She gave me a look of deep, profound disappointment. Nora. Please. Catherine began, her voice dripping with artificial maternal warmth. Your father is simply trying to secure the future of this family. Why do you always have to be so incredibly difficult? You have fought us every single step of the way since you were a little girl. We are just asking for a tiny bit of gratitude. Gratitude, I repeated flatly. Yes, gratitude. Catherine snapped her warm facade, slipping for a second, before she forced it back into place. Do you have any idea how much we have sacrificed for you? When you graduated high school and insisted on going to that overpriced out-of-state university, who do you think paid for your freshman dorm? Who do you think co-signed the loan for that beat-up little car you drove around in your 20s? We did, Nora. We gave you everything you needed to succeed, and you threw it right back in our faces by refusing to work for your father's company. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. The sheer audacity of her historical revisionism was staggering. You did not pay for my freshman dorm, Mom, I stated calmly, refusing to let her gaslight me in front of the entire table. You forced me to take out predatory student loans and told me it was character building, and that beat-up little car. You co-signed a loan with a 15% interest rate and then threatened to report the car stolen when I was 2 days late on a payment during my final exams. Catherine waved her hand dismissively, as if my actual lived trauma was just a minor clerical error. Details, Nora. The point is, we were there for you. We gave you a roof over your head. We even let you rent one of the commercial apartments your father owns so you could start that little forensic accounting firm of yours. We gave you a massive discount on the rent. A massive discount, I challenged, raising one eyebrow. The apartment has a leaking roof, black mold in the guest bathroom, and a broken heating system that you have refused to fix for 4 years. I pay market rate for a slum. You are not my benefactors. You are my absentee landlords. Brittany let out an exaggerated groan from across the table. Oh my God. Nora, stop playing the ultimate victim. Mom and Dad have bent over backward for you your entire life, and you are just a bitter, ungrateful brat. Just sign the stupid paper so we can order dessert. Jamal needs a drink. Jamal did not look up. He was still staring vacantly at his empty plate, clearly contemplating his own impending financial ruin. Catherine leaned forward again, her eyes glistening with tears. She was pulling out her ultimate weapon. The emotional hostage situation. Nora. I am begging you as your mother. My health has not been good lately. My heart palpitates every single time there is conflict in this family. The stress of this corporate transition is literally killing me. Do you want to be the reason I end up in the hospital? Do you want that guilt hanging over your head for the rest of your life? Just pick up the pen, sign the document, give your sister her future, and give me some peace of mind. You owe us this much. You owe us your loyalty. She pressed her hand to her chest right over her heart. I looked at her perfectly flushed cheeks and her steady, rhythmic breathing. There was absolutely nothing wrong with her heart. The only thing broken inside my mother was her moral compass. Think about the time you were hospitalized with appendicitis during your senior year. Catherine whispered, her voice trembling with fake emotion. Who sat by your bed, Nora? Who held your hand while you were crying from the pain? I was there. I put my entire social life on hold to make sure my daughter was safe. My hands balled into tight fists under the table. That was the most despicable lie of the entire night. You were not there, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You dropped me off at the emergency room door and told me to call you when the surgery was over because you had a charity gala to attend. I woke up alone in a sterile recovery room. The nurses felt so bad for me, they bought me a stuffed bear from the hospital gift shop. You did not even visit until the next afternoon, and only because you needed me to sign the insurance paperwork. Catherine flinched slightly, her eyes darting toward Richard to see if he was going to bail her out. But my father was busy checking his phone, completely detached from the emotional slaughter happening right next to him. He only cared about the signature on the legal document. You are remembering it all wrong, Catherine insisted stubbornly, doubling down on her delusion. You were heavily medicated. Your memory is completely distorted. We have always loved you just as much as we love Brittany. We simply push you harder because you are so stubborn. We are your family, Nora. The only people in this world who will ever truly accept you. Do not throw us away over a meaningless piece of paper. You owe us your signature. I looked at my mother and felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no obligation. I reached across the table, but I did not pick up the gold pen. Instead, I picked up my glass of tap water and took a slow, deliberate sip. I owe you nothing, Mom, I said, setting the glass back down. And I am definitely not signing a blanket waiver of liability just because you know how to squeeze out a few fake tears on command. Catherine gasped and pulled her hand back as if I had physically struck her. You cold, ungrateful little brat, she hissed, the maternal warmth instantly evaporating from her face. I should have known you would ruin this night. My father leaned forward, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. Stop playing games, Nora Richard warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous guttural pitch. I am rapidly losing my patience. Then lose it, Dad. I shot back, my tone matching his intensity. Because I am losing my mind trying to understand why a supposedly seasoned corporate executive is trying to execute a multi-million-dollar transition of power at a steakhouse on a Friday night. Richard blinked clearly, caught off guard by my direct challenge. I am just trying to handle family business privately. He deflected, looking around the room as if the walls were listening. Family business does not require a comprehensive corporate indemnity clause, I countered, leaning in closer. This entire setup is completely absurd. Why bypass the corporate attorney's office? Why bypass the board of directors? You are handing over your entire life work over a plate of cold beef and expecting me to just blindly sign away my legal rights. That is not corporate succession planning, Dad. That is an emergency liquidation. You are running from something massive. What exactly is coming for this company? Richard opened his mouth to spin another calculated lie, but Brittany beat him to it. She threw her hands up in the air, completely exasperated by my refusal to comply with her fantasy. Oh my God, Nora. Who cares why he is doing it here? Brittany whined, her shrill voice grating against my nerves. Daddy is just trying to protect the family assets before the federal auditors show up on Wednesday. If you do not sign that paper right now, the federal agents are going to freeze all the operating accounts and Jamal and I will not be able to close on our new luxury house. Just do what you are told for once in your miserable life so we can leave. The entire table froze. It was as if all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. Jamal slowly turned his head to look at his wife, his jaw literally dropping open. Richard looked like he wanted to reach across the table and strangle his golden child. Catherine squeezed her eyes shut in pure horror, realizing what her favorite daughter had just done. I leaned back in my chair and let out a genuine loud laugh. It was a sound that had not escaped my lips in the presence of my family for over a decade. Auditors, I repeated, letting the heavy word hang in the quiet air. Federal auditors from the Internal Revenue Service are coming on Wednesday. Shut up, Brittany, Richard roared, his voice cracking with sheer panic. Not another word. But the catastrophic damage was already done. The golden child had just handed me the final missing piece of the puzzle. I looked at Jamal, who was now sweating profusely under the dim restaurant lighting. Did you hear that, Jamal? I asked, sweetly tilting my head. The federal government is coming on Wednesday, and your loving father-in-law is trying to make you the co-chief executive officer today. He is not giving you a real estate empire. He is handing you a federal indictment. When those auditors inevitably find the missing money, they are going to look directly at whoever is sitting in the big chair, and it looks like Richard desperately wants you and Brittany to take the fall for his massive tax evasion. Jamal stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward and crashed loudly onto the hardwood floor. You set me up, Jamal yelled, pointing a visibly shaking finger right at Richard's face. You were going to let me go to federal prison for your financial mess. Calm down. Jamal Richard scrambled, trying to stand up but bumping his knees awkwardly against the heavy table. The girl does not know what she is talking about. It is just a routine compliance check. The corporate lawyers have it completely under control. We just need to finalize the paperwork tonight to keep the accounts secure. But I was already shaking my head, refusing to let him regain control of the narrative. "It is never just a routine check when you are hiding money offshore," I said calmly. "And it is definitely not routine when the agency sends federal agents to freeze your accounts. They already know, Dad. The walls are closing in, and you are completely out of time." Richard stared at me with eyes that suddenly looked hollow. The invincible patriarch was unraveling right in front of his stake. He opened his mouth to deny the accusations, but the words died in his throat. He looked around as if searching for a hidden camera. "How did you get this information?" he finally rasped, his voice stripped of its power. "You are just a low-level accountant working out of a damp basement. You do not have access to my ledgers." "I do not need your private ledgers, Dad," I replied, folding my hands on the pristine tablecloth. When you run an empire built entirely on lies, the cracks eventually show up in the public domain. It started when I noticed shifts in your property deeds last month. You were rapidly transferring ownership of prime downtown office buildings into newly formed anonymous holding companies. That is a textbook asset protection move right before a massive federal seizure. Brittany was frantically scrolling through her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling. "Daddy, what is she saying?" Brittany cried out, her voice bordering on full hysteria. "Tell me she's lying. Tell me the money is safe." "Your money has not been safe for 3 years, Brittany," I answered for him. "Because Dad has not just been evading taxes. He has been committing fraud. The IRS is not looking for a few missing receipts. They are looking for exactly $12 million in unpaid federal taxes and civil penalties." The number hit the table like a physical weight. 12. Catherine let out a short gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. Jamal physically recoiled, stepping away from the table as if the legal documents were radioactive. 12 million. Jamal repeated, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He looked at Richard. "You are going to use my name on the new corporate filings to shield yourself from a $12 million federal tax liability. You were going to let me take the fall for your offshore accounts while you and Catherine fled the country." Richard did not even bother looking at Jamal. His eyes were entirely locked on me, filled with a cold, calculating hatred that I had never fully seen before. The mask of the benevolent father was entirely gone. What was left was the ruthless corporate shark who would destroy absolutely anyone to save his own skin. "You think you have outsmarted me, Nora?" Richard sneered, leaning across the table until his face was inches from mine. "You think you can walk into my birthday dinner, throw around a few federal tax terms, and suddenly dictate the terms of my life? You are nothing. You have always been nothing. You are a bitter, lonely girl who could never measure up to your sister, so you spent your life obsessing over my success." He pointed a thick finger right at my face. "If you do not pick up that pen and sign the liability waiver right now, I will destroy you. I will not just evict you from your apartment. I will unleash a legal nightmare on your pathetic little forensic accounting firm. I have the most aggressive corporate defense attorneys in Chicago on a massive monthly retainer. I will tie you up in so much frivolous litigation that you will spend the next 10 years drowning in legal fees." Catherine found her voice again, completely energized by my father's vicious threats. "Your father is right, Nora," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into cruel slits. "We will sue you for corporate espionage. We will sue you for defamation. We will report your accounting license to the state board and have you permanently disbarred for stealing confidential family financial documents. We will make sure you never work in the financial sector again. You will be completely ruined. You will be working as a cashier at a grocery store by the time we are done with you." Richard added, his voice dropping into a menacing growl. "I will personally make sure every major corporate client in this city knows that Nora Williams is a rogue, unstable accountant who steals from her own family. Now pick up the damn pen and sign the paper before I make a phone call that ends your entire pathetic career." I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the waiver of liability that was designed to make me an unwitting accomplice to their massive $12 million federal crime. Then I looked at my father and smiled. It was a genuine, relaxed smile. You cannot ruin a career that is built on catching men exactly like you, Dad, I said softly. I pushed the heavy legal documents right back across the white tablecloth. And you definitely cannot fire an accountant who does not actually work for you. Before I could even finish my sentence, the heavy mahogany doors of our private dining room swung open with a loud thud. The sudden noise made everyone at the table jump. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit walked into the room. He carried a sleek black leather briefcase and possessed an aura of absolute unquestionable authority. This was not the terrified young waiter returning with Catherine's champagne. This was Mr. Donovan. He was a former federal prosecutor who had built a terrifying reputation as the most ruthless corporate fraud attorney in the entire state of Illinois. Richard stared at the man walking toward our table. My father's face went through a rapid series of microscopic changes. First, there was pure shock, then a flash of genuine fear. Finally, he settled on the slick, greasy smile of a desperate salesman trying to close a bad deal. Richard aggressively pushed his chair back and stood up quickly, almost knocking over his water glass in his haste to assert his dominance in the room. "Well, I will be damned," Richard boomed, projecting his loud country club voice across the private dining space. "Thomas Donovan, what on earth are you doing crashing my private birthday dinner? If I had known you were eating at the Monarch tonight, I would have sent a bottle of scotch over to your table." Richard stepped around the table and thrust his large hand out, expecting a firm handshake. He was desperately trying to play the old boys club politics. He wanted to show Jamal and Brittany that he was still the ultimate patriarch who rubbed elbows with the legal elite of Chicago. "I played 18 holes with your managing partner just last month at the Oak Brook Country Club." Richard continued, his smile stretching so wide it looked painful. "How is the firm doing? I heard you guys just landed that massive corporate defense contract with the city. You know my real estate company is always looking for top-tier representation for our upcoming expansions. We should set up a tea time next week and talk business." Mr. Donovan stopped walking. He looked down at Richard's outstretched hand as if it were a piece of trash lying on the expensive carpet. He did not raise his arm. He did not smile. He did not even offer a polite nod of acknowledgement. The silence in the room stretched out, becoming incredibly uncomfortable. Richard's hand hung in the empty air. His greasy smile slowly began to falter under the freezing weight of Donovan's stare. "Are you lost, Thomas?" Richard asked, his voice losing a fraction of its booming confidence. "This is a private family event." Donovan finally moved. He completely bypassed my father, stepping around him without a single word. He walked directly toward my side of the table. Richard awkwardly pulled his hand back, his face flushing a deep, angry red at the blatant public disrespect. In all my years, I had never seen my father treated like a subordinate. He was always the loudest, most demanding man in any room. Watching a real power player completely ignore him was like watching a massive balloon slowly deflate. Mr. Donovan stopped right next to my chair and placed his black leather briefcase flat on the white tablecloth, right next to the fraudulent legal documents my father had been trying to force me to sign. He popped the brass locks open with a sharp click. "Good evening, Nora." Mr. Donovan said, his voice calm and deeply professional. "I apologize for the slight delay. Traffic on the expressway was completely backed up due to a minor accident. Have we reached the necessary point in the conversation yet?" "We have," I replied, keeping my voice just as calm and professional. Richard was just explaining his sudden desire to retire and gracefully passed the corporate torch to Jamal and Brittany. He even brought a liability waiver for me to sign. Donovan glanced down at the gold pen and the thick stack of papers resting in front of me. He let out a short, dry chuckle that held absolutely zero humor. How remarkably predictable, he noted, pulling a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. "It is always a liability waiver. They really think a single piece of paper can stop a federal investigation." Catherine finally found her voice. She stood up, her diamond necklaces sparkling under the chandelier. "Excuse me?" Catherine demanded, crossing her arms over her chest. "Who do you think you are, barging into our private dining room?" Richard offered you a polite greeting and you completely ignored him. I do not care what kind of fancy lawyer you are. You are ruining my husband's 60th birthday dinner. I am calling the restaurant manager right now to have you forcibly removed from this establishment immediately. Donovan did not even look at my mother. He kept his eyes focused entirely on the documents he was pulling from his envelope. You can call whoever you like, Ma'am Donovan said smoothly. But unless the restaurant manager is carrying a badge from the Department of Justice, I highly doubt he is going to interfere with my business tonight. The phrase Department of Justice hung in the air like a live grenade. Catherine froze with her hand still reaching for her designer purse. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The threat of calling the restaurant manager suddenly seemed entirely ridiculous in the face of federal authority. Richard, however, was not ready to surrender his kingdom. He slammed both of his hands on the table and leaned toward the lawyer. You are completely out of line, Thomas. Richard barked, his voice laced with desperate anger. You cannot just walk into a private dining room at a five-star restaurant and harass an innocent family. I do not care if you used to work for the federal government. You are a private defense attorney now. You have absolutely no jurisdiction here, and I will have you reported to the State Bar Association for this blatant intimidation tactic. Donovan finally stopped sorting through his papers. He looked up and met my father's angry gaze. His expression was completely blank, entirely devoid of any intimidation or fear. I am not here to intimidate you, Richard, Donovan replied, his voice dangerously quiet. I am here to execute a legally binding court order signed by a federal judge less than an hour ago. And for the record, I am not acting as a defense attorney tonight. I am acting as the appointed legal counsel for the sole legitimate owner of Apex Holdings. Donovan turned away from my stunned father and placed a thick stack of papers directly in front of me. These were not the cheap boilerplate liability waivers my father had brought. These were official federal court documents printed on heavy bonded paper and stamped with the unmistakable blue seal of the United States District Court. Please review these documents carefully, Nora Donovan instructed, handing me a silver luxury pen that cost more than my first car. The emergency injunction was granted exactly as you requested. All corporate accounts associated with Williams Commercial Real Estate and its offshore subsidiaries have been officially frozen pending the complete transfer of administrative control. Catherine let out a piercing shriek that made the crystal wine glasses vibrate. Transfer of control! Catherine yelled, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. What are you talking about? Richard owns everything. He built that company from the ground up. You cannot just come in here and steal our family business. I want you out of this room right now. Get out. Leave us alone. This is a private family dinner, and you are completely ruining my husband's 60th birthday. My mother was hyperventilating, now her chest heaving as she gripped the edges of the white tablecloth. She looked desperately at Brittany, expecting her golden child to jump in and defend the family honor. But Brittany was entirely paralyzed. She was staring at the blue federal seals on the documents as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. Jamal was sitting completely rigid in his chair, his eyes darting wildly around the room as he fully realized the catastrophic legal danger he was sitting in. Mom, please stop shouting, Brittany whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. People are staring at us. I do not care who is staring, Catherine screamed, losing all sense of her carefully cultivated high society decorum. She pointed a trembling finger at me. You planned this, Nora. You brought this vicious shark into our private celebration just to ruin your sister's future. You have always been a spiteful, jealous little girl. I am calling the police. I am calling the real police to have this man arrested for trespassing and harassment. Catherine frantically dug into her designer purse and pulled out her smartphone. She tapped the screen violently, her manicured nails clicking against the glass. I strongly advise against making that phone call, Catherine Donovan said calmly, not even bothering to look in her direction. If you bring the local police into this room, they will be legally obligated to run a background check on everyone present. And considering your husband currently has an active federal warrant being finalized at this very moment, inviting law enforcement to your dinner table would be an incredibly foolish decision. The smartphone slipped from Catherine's trembling hands and clattered onto the hardwood floor. She stared at Donovan, her eyes wide with absolute horror. An active federal warrant, she repeated in a breathless whisper. Richard collapsed back into his heavy leather chair. All the color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick old man rather than a ruthless corporate titan. He stared at the federal documents sitting in front of me, the documents that effectively ended his entire corrupt empire. "What did you do, Nora?" Richard asked, his voice barely a hollow, raspy whisper. "What exactly did you do?" I picked up the heavy silver pen Donovan had given me. I looked at my father and then at my mother, who was now silently crying into her napkin. I felt the smooth surface of the pen and the crisp texture of the federal court order. This was the exact moment they realized I was never the weak link in the family. "I did exactly what you taught me to do, Dad," I replied, my voice completely steady and cold. "I protected my assets." I pulled the topmost document from the stack and smoothed it flat against the table. The heavy parchment felt like justice in my hands. I cleared my throat, letting the sound cut through my mother's pathetic whimpering. In the matter of the United States federal government versus Richard Williams and Apex Holdings, I began reading the bold black text loud enough for the entire room to hear. "The court hereby grants an emergency injunction to immediately seize and freeze all financial assets, bank accounts, and property deeds associated with the aforementioned corporate entity." Richard let out a strangled gasp. He reached for his water glass, but his hand was shaking so violently that he knocked it over. The ice water spilled across the table, soaking into the pristine white linen and dripping onto his expensive leather shoes. He did not even seem to notice. "The court finds compelling preliminary evidence." I continued, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls of the private dining room, that the corporate entity known as Apex Holdings was established using fraudulent means, specifically the unauthorized use of stolen identity documents. Brittany finally looked up from her phone. "Stolen identity," she whispered, looking completely horrified by the legal terms flying across the table. She looked back and forth between me and our father, her eyes wide with mounting panic. "Dad, what is she talking about? Who stole whose identity? Why are they saying the company was built on fraudulent documents?" I did not wait for Richard to answer. I flipped to the second page of the federal order and pointed the heavy silver pen at the attached exhibit. "5 years ago," I said, looking directly at my sister. "Right around the time I opened my small accounting firm, Dad suddenly became very interested in helping me file my state business licenses. He said he wanted to make sure I did not make any rookie mistakes. He asked for my social security number, my birth certificate, and my signature on a few blank state registration forms. I trusted him because he was my father." I turned my gaze back to Richard. His face had gone completely gray. The arrogant corporate titan was entirely gone, replaced by a cornered criminal realizing there was no way out. "But he did not use those forms to help my business," I stated flatly. "He used my social security number and my forged signature to quietly register Apex Holdings in the state of Delaware. He named me as the sole owner and the primary shareholder of a massive offshore shell corporation without my knowledge or consent." Catherine let out a loud sob and buried her face in her hands. She knew. She had known the entire time. "You used your own daughter's identity to commit federal tax evasion," Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. He stood up again, completely unable to remain seated. "You set her up to take the fall for a $12 million tax debt. If the federal agents had raided your office before tonight, they would have arrested Nora for your massive crimes. They would have sent her to federal prison for crimes she did not even know existed." "I was going to fix it," Richard stammered, his voice a pathetic, raspy whine. He looked at Jamal, pleading for an ally that no longer existed. "It was just a temporary measure. The business was going through a rough patch, and I needed a clean legal entity to move some liquid assets. I was going to transfer the ownership back to myself before the auditors ever found out. I was protecting the family money, Jamal. I was protecting Brittany's inheritance. Do not, you dare use my name to justify this! Brittany shrieked, standing up and backing away from the table as if our father had a highly contagious disease. You stole my sister's identity to save your own skin. You forged federal documents and risked putting her in a prison cell. You are a complete criminal, Dad. I looked at my sister, completely unmoved by her sudden display of moral outrage. Do not act so incredibly shocked, Brittany, I said, my tone dripping with pure ice. You might not have known the exact legal details of Apex Holdings, but you certainly enjoyed the dirty money it produced. Where do you think the cash for your luxury destination wedding came from? You have been living off my stolen identity for 5 years. Mr. Donovan stepped forward, resting his hands on the back of my chair. He looked down at Richard with the cold, detached expression of an executioner. My team spent the last 3 months conducting a covert forensic audit of every single ledger associated with your real estate empire, Richard. We provided the Department of Justice with irrefutable evidence proving that you and Catherine knowingly committed aggravated identity theft, wire fraud, and massive federal tax evasion today. This injunction is merely the very first step in dismantling everything you have illegally built over the last 30 years. You thought you could simply toss your daughter to the federal wolves to save your luxury lifestyle, but your massive arrogance blinded you to the fact that I am much smarter than you ever gave me credit for. You are absolutely finished. Richard stared at the lawyer, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. He shook his head aggressively, refusing to accept the reality of the situation. You cannot just take my company, Richard snarled, gripping the edges of the table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. I built Williams Commercial Real Estate. My name is on the original charter. You can freeze the accounts, but you cannot legally take my life work away from me. I will fight you in every single court in this country. Mr. Donovan let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut through my father's desperate bluster. You clearly do not understand the magnitude of your own stupidity, Richard the lawyer replied, shaking his head slowly. You are right about one thing. Your name was on the original charter. But 3 years ago, when you realized the federal tax audits were looming, you panicked. You systematically transferred the deeds of all your prime commercial properties, your luxury apartment buildings, and your cash reserves into Apex Holdings. You did this to hide those massive assets from the Internal Revenue Service. Donovan leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the white tablecloth. And because you wanted zero paper trail linking you to that offshore shell company, you named your eldest daughter, Nora, as the sole proprietor and 100% shareholder. You forged her signature on the state registry documents. You legally gifted her your entire empire to save yourself. I watched my father's eyes widen as the catastrophic legal reality finally crashed down on him. But it was a forgery. Richard stammered, his voice rising in pure panic. I signed her name. I can prove it was a forgery. The transfer is completely invalid. I smiled at him. It was a cold, calculating smile that mirrored the exact expression he had given me my entire life. Think very carefully about what you are saying, Dad, I warned him softly. If you walk into a federal courtroom and swear under oath that you forged my signature on those corporate documents, you are openly confessing to aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. The mandatory minimum sentence for those federal crimes is 10 years in a maximum security prison. I paused, letting the heavy weight of those years sink into his mind. On the other hand, I continued, if you claim the documents are entirely legitimate and that you willingly gave me the company, then I am the sole legal owner of a commercial real estate portfolio worth exactly $30 million. So tell me, Dad, which legal strategy do you want to use? Do you want to confess to a federal felony, or do you want to admit that I own every single brick of your empire? Checkmate. The private dining room fell into an absolute dead silence. There was no escape. I had trapped him in a perfect legal paradox. Catherine let out a pathetic whimpering sound. She gripped the edge of the table so tightly her manicured nails looked ready to snap. She was suddenly forced to realize that the daughter she had mocked for drinking tap water was now the wealthiest person in the room by a massive margin. She looked at Richard, expecting her powerful husband to pull a miracle out of thin air, but Richard was completely broken. He slumped down into his heavy leather chair, staring blankly at the cold steak on his plate. Brittany suddenly let out a loud, piercing scream. She slammed both of her hands on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. "No!" Brittany shrieked, her face contorted with pure rage. "That is my money. That is my inheritance. You promised me the company daddy. You promised Jamal and me the co-chief executive officer titles. You cannot let her steal $30 million from us. Do something. You do not have an inheritance, Brittany," I said calmly, turning my gaze to my younger sister. "You never did. You had a fantasy funded by stolen money and tax evasion. And as for the company, I am not stealing anything. I am simply claiming the assets that were legally registered in my name. In fact, as the sole owner of Apex Holdings, I spent the entire morning restructuring my corporate portfolio." I looked at Jamal, who was watching me with a mixture of absolute horror and reluctant respect. "That $5 million deal you thought you were closing today, Jamal?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "I canceled the wire transfer 4 hours ago. I fired the escrow agent, and I formally dissolved the trust fund you were trying to use. The money is gone." Jamal swallowed hard, his jaw clenching nervously. He looked down at his empty hands, realizing his luxury lifestyle was entirely over. But I did not stop there. I continued addressing the entire table. "Because I am a certified forensic accountant and a cooperative federal witness, the Department of Justice granted me full immunity. I legally separated the clean assets from the fraudulent tax liabilities. The $30 million portfolio is securely locked in a new trust under my exclusive control. The $12 million tax debt, however, remains firmly attached to Richard and Catherine Williams personally. You tried to bury me in your financial grave, but I climbed out and threw you in instead." Jamal could not just take my word for it. The confident swagger he had paraded into the restaurant with was completely gone, leaving behind a desperate man teetering on the edge of a massive panic attack. He pushed himself away from the table, his heavy chair screeching against the polished hardwood floor. Ignoring the furious glares from my father, he walked slowly around the large dining table and stopped right behind my chair. He leaned over my shoulder, his breathing ragged and uneven, as his dark eyes scanned the dense legal text printed on the federal court order. "Let him read it," Mr. Donovan said calmly, waving a hand toward the documents. "It is public record now, anyway. Every single transaction has been meticulously cataloged by the federal government. Jamal was a licensed real estate broker. He spent his entire career navigating complex contracts, escrow agreements, and massive financial transfers. He knew exactly how to read the fine print." I watched his large hands grip the back of my chair so tightly, his knuckles strained against his dark skin. He read the second page of the injunction, tracing the highlighted text with his eyes. The document detailed the exact origin of the $5 million trust fund he had been boasting about just an hour ago. "This cannot be right," Jamal whispered, his voice trembling. He leaned closer, completely disregarding any concept of personal space. "The escrow account for the Lake Forest property. It says here the funds were wired directly from Apex Holdings." "That is correct," I replied, not turning around. "Richard did not use his domestic operating accounts to fund your new luxury mansion, Jamal. He used the offshore shell company. He used the exact same account that the Internal Revenue Service just flagged for massive corporate tax evasion and international money laundering." Jamal's chest heaved as he continued reading the federal mandate. The legal jargon was dense, but the implications were crystal clear to anyone holding a real estate license. He saw the specific federal statutes listed on the page. Title 18, United States Code Section 1956. The laundering of monetary instruments. If Jamal had actually signed those closing documents this morning, he would have authorized the transfer of $5 million of federally frozen dirty money. He would have instantly become an active participant in a massive federal crime. He slowly stood up straight, the sheer gravity of the situation crashing over him. As a licensed professional, he was legally obligated to verify the source of funds for any transaction exceeding $10,000. He had blindly trusted his wealthy father-in-law. Richard had purposefully exploited that trust, using Jamal's desperate need for approval and financial success to turn him into an unwitting money mule. "You used me!" Jamal suddenly shouted, his voice echoing violently off the expensive mahogany walls. He let go of my chair and spun around to face my father. "You completely used me, Richard. You told me that money was a clean family gift from a domestic trust. You told me the escrow was fully funded and ready to close. If I had signed that broker agreement today, the federal government would be kicking my door down right now. I would lose my broker's license. I would be facing 20 years in federal prison for money laundering." Richard tried to formulate a response, but he just sat there, opening and closing his mouth like a suffocated fish. The commanding patriarch was entirely paralyzed by the overwhelming legal evidence stacked against him. He had nothing left to say. Jamal turned his absolute fury toward his wife. Brittany was shrinking back into her expensive leather chair, trying to make herself look as small as possible. "And you?" Jamal snarled, pointing a shaking finger right at her face. "Did you know about this? Did you know your father was using our new house to wash his dirty offshore money?" "I did not know anything," Brittany cried out, her voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "Daddy just told me the money was ready for the down payment. He said he handled all the banking details. You know I do not understand any of that legal accounting stuff. I just wanted the house in Lake Forest. I just wanted us to be happy." "You just wanted the house," Jamal mocked, her tone vicious and utterly devoid of any affection. "You wanted the giant mansion. You wanted the luxury cars. You wanted the designer clothes. And you did not care if your father had to forge your own sister's signature to get it. You are completely unbelievable." Jamal paced back and forth across the private dining room, running his large hands over his face in sheer disbelief. The absolute magnitude of his financial ruin was finally setting in. He had maxed out his credit cards to maintain the illusion of wealth. He had leveraged his entire career on this single massive real estate deal. The commission from the Lake Forest property was supposed to save him from foreclosure. Without that money, he had absolutely nothing. The luxury car, the designer suits, the expensive watches, were all going to be repossessed by the end of the month. The wealthy facade he had carefully built was crumbling to dust right in front of his eyes. "I am bankrupt," Jamal muttered, stopping his frantic pacing and staring blankly at the wall. "The $5 million is gone. The commission is gone. I cannot pay the desk fees at my brokerage. I cannot even pay the minimum balance on my credit cards. I am completely broke. I am completely broke." Jamal let the reality of those words settle deep into his bones. He stood completely still in the center of the private dining room. His broad shoulders slumped and his expensive custom-tailored suit suddenly looked like a cheap, desperate costume. He slowly turned his head to look at Brittany. The absolute devastation in his eyes was rapidly hardening into a fierce, blinding rage. He did not look at her like she was his wife anymore. He looked at her like she was a stranger who had just ruined his entire life. "You made me feel like I was never enough," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that filled the quiet room. "From the very first day I walked into your parents' massive house, you all looked down your noses at me. You treated me like some charity project you generously allowed into your exclusive little world." Brittany shook her head, her perfectly styled hair falling into her tear-stained face. "Jamal, please do not say that," she sobbed, reaching her hands out toward him. "You know I love you. We can fix this. We can start over." Jamal took a large step backward, swatting her hands away, as if her touch would physically burn him. "Do not put your hands on me," he snapped, his voice sharp and full of pure disgust. "You never loved me, Brittany. You loved having a successful black husband you could parade around your high society country club events to prove how progressive and modern you were. You loved showing off the man who pulled himself up from the South Side to sell luxury mansions. But the second the doors closed, your parents always made sure I knew exactly where I stood. Jamal pointed a shaking finger at Richard, who was still staring blankly at his cold steak. Your father made me pay a $50,000 initiation fee to join his exclusive golf club, just so I could be seen as an acceptable son-in-law. Jamal yelled, his voice cracking with intense frustration. I took out a predatory personal loan to pay that fee, because you told me it was an investment in our future. You told me it was the Williams family standard. Your mother constantly made her little passive-aggressive comments about my background, my family, and my neighborhood. She always made sure I knew that your money was old and respectable, while my money was just a desperate hustle. Catherine opened her mouth to object, but Jamal immediately silenced her with a furious glare. "Shut your mouth, Catherine!" Jamal roared, the sheer volume making my mother physically flinch and sink lower into her chair. "Do not try to gaslight me anymore. I am done playing your pathetic games." Jamal turned his fury back to Brittany, pacing back and forth in front of her chair. "You demanded the absolute best of everything." He continued, his tone vicious and relentless. "You demanded the luxury vacations to Europe, the custom designer bags, and the five-star dinners. You pushed me to lease high-end sports cars I could not afford because you said we had an image to maintain. You watched me drown in hundreds of thousands of dollars of consumer debt, trying to keep up with your fake billionaire lifestyle, and the entire time you were paying for your half of our life with stolen identity money." "It was not stolen," Brittany cried out desperately, trying to justify her actions. "Daddy said it was a tax strategy. He said rich people do it all the time. He did it for us, Jamal. He wanted to secure our future." Jamal let out a harsh, bitter laugh that sounded almost painful. "A tax strategy," he repeated, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "You look at kids from my old neighborhood selling drugs on the street corner, and you call them dangerous criminals who belong in jail. You lock your car doors when you drive through the South Side. But your father sits in a luxury penthouse, stealing $12 million from the federal government by forging his own daughter's signature, and you call him a brilliant businessman. You are a family of common thieves wearing expensive suits," Jamal declared, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "You are worse than any street hustler I have ever met because you actually believe you are inherently better than everyone else. My mother scrubbed hospital floors on her hands and knees so I could go to college and get my real estate license. I worked 80 hours a week trying to build a legitimate career because I wanted to be an honest man. And I threw all my morals away to fit into your toxic, racist little world because I thought you were the pinnacle of American success." Jamal leaned down, bringing his face inches from Brittany's trembling form. "You set me up to be the perfect scapegoat," he whispered fiercely. "When the federal agents came looking for the missing millions, they would have found the ambitious black broker signing the escrow documents. Your father would have thrown me to the federal wolves to save his own skin, and you would have let him do it. You are nothing but white-collar criminals hiding behind country club memberships and stolen money." Jamal stood there, his chest heaving as the finality of his own words hung in the quiet room. He looked down at his left hand. The heavy gold Rolex Daytona glittered aggressively under the crystal chandelier. It was the ultimate status symbol he had bought just to prove he belonged at this table. But now, looking at the polished metal, all he saw was a predatory 22% interest rate and a physical chain binding him to a family of federal felons. With a swift, decisive motion, Jamal reached over and unclasped the heavy watch. He did not gently place it on the table. He threw it. The solid gold timepiece crashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, sliding across the surface until it hit my father's discarded wine glass. The loud clatter echoed sharply, making Brittany flinch. "You can keep the watch," Richard Jamal said, his voice eerily calm now that his fury had burned through its initial explosive peak. "You can keep the country club membership, and you can keep your filthy offshore accounts. I am entirely done with all of it." He turned back to his wife. Brittany was trembling, her perfectly applied makeup completely ruined by her tears. "I am filing for divorce in the morning," Jamal announced, the words landing like heavy stones. "I am calling my attorney the second I walk out of this restaurant." "We are completely finished, Brittany," No! Brittany shrieked, launching herself out of her chair. She grabbed Jamal's arm, her manicured fingernails digging into the expensive fabric of his custom suit. No, Jamal, please, you cannot do this. We are married. We took vows. You promised to stand by me through better or worse. You cannot just abandon me when things get difficult. Jamal looked down at her hands, gripping his arm with utter revulsion. He physically pried her fingers off his suit, stepping back to put distance between them. Do not dare lecture me about marital vows, Brittany, he snapped, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. Your idea of worse was having to fly commercial instead of private. My idea of worse is facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary because my own wife happily let her father forge documents to use me as a human shield. There is absolutely no coming back from that. Brittany fell to her knees right there on the expensive dining room carpet. The golden child who had spent her entire life looking down on everyone else was now completely broken, groveling at the feet of the man she had treated as a mere accessory. Please, Jamal, she sobbed, her voice echoing with raw desperation. I will change. We can move away. We can leave Chicago and start over somewhere else. We do not need my parents' money. I will get a job. We can live in a normal house. Just please do not leave me alone. Jamal let out a hollow, bitter laugh, looking down at her weeping form. You get a job, he mocked, gesturing toward her designer dress and diamond jewelry. You have never worked a single hard day in your entire 31 years of existence. And do not talk to me about a normal life. Do you remember when my mother came to visit us from the South Side last Thanksgiving? You complained that her coat smelled like public transit. You refused to let her sleep in our guest room because you said it would ruin the aesthetic of your pristine house. You treated the woman who gave me life like she was a stray dog. Brittany covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably, as her past cruelty was shoved directly into the light. I am sorry, she wailed. I was wrong, Jamal. You were not wrong. Jamal corrected, his voice turning entirely cold. You are exactly who you always have been. The first time we miss a mortgage payment on some normal house, you will be crying on the phone to your mother begging for a bailout. And there will not be a bailout anymore, Brittany, because your parents are going to be completely broke and locked in federal prison. Richard finally found a shred of his old arrogance. See here, Jamal, my father barked, trying to inject authority into his wavering voice. You do not just walk away from this family, you are legally bound to us. If you leave now, you will walk away with absolutely nothing. We will make sure you are entirely ruined in this city. Jamal turned his head slowly, locking his dark eyes onto my father. I am already ruined, Richard, he stated flatly. You made absolutely sure of that. But I would rather walk out of here with nothing but the clothes on my back than spend one more second breathing the same air as you. You thought you could buy my loyalty and then use it to destroy me. But you vastly underestimated my survival instincts. Catherine tried to intervene, her voice a pathetic whisper. Jamal, please be reasonable. Think of the massive public scandal. There is no public scandal worse than a federal indictment. Catherine Jamal shot back, cutting her off instantly. You better start worrying about how you are going to survive without your luxury spas and your catered lunches because your entire world is ending tonight. He turned his back on them, completely ignoring Brittany's hysterical wailing. He looked at me for the first time since Mr. Donovan had arrived. The anger in his eyes softened just a fraction, replaced by a dark mutual understanding. We were both outsiders who had been entirely used by this toxic family. The only difference was that I had seen the trap coming, and he had walked right into it blindly. You played a brilliant game, Nora, Jamal said, giving me a single respectful nod. You let them dig their own graves, and then you simply handed them the shovels. I should have listened to you years ago. I looked back at him, my expression perfectly neutral. It is never too late to walk away, Jamal, I replied quietly. Jamal held my gaze for a long moment, letting my words settle in the quiet space between us. It is never too late to walk away. He repeated the phrase softly under his breath, as if tasting the freedom it offered. He gave me one final slow nod of acknowledgement. There was no warmth in it, but there was a deep, profound respect. We were no longer family, but we were both survivors of the exact same sinking ship. Without another glance at his weeping wife or my stunned parents, Jamal turned on his heel and strode purposefully toward the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room. His footsteps were loud and heavy against the polished hardwood floor. "Jamal, wait!" Brittany shrieked, scrambling up from the carpet. Her high heels caught on her designer dress, causing her to stumble. She lunged forward, reaching for the back of his custom suit jacket. "Do not leave me here with them. You cannot just walk out on me." Jamal did not even break his stride. He reached the double doors and threw them open with such violent force that they slammed against the interior walls. The loud crash echoed out into the main dining area, instantly silencing the soft jazz music and the low hum of wealthy patrons enjoying their meals. The gap in the doors revealed a dozen well-dressed diners and several terrified waiters actively staring at our imploding family. Jamal stepped into the hallway, ignoring the audience. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, dialing a number with sharp, angry jabs of his thumb. He held the phone to his ear as he walked away. The hallway acoustics carried his booming voice right back into our room for everyone to hear. "Marcus, it is Jamal," he barked into the phone, his voice echoing down the corridor. "I need you to file emergency divorce papers right now. Tonight. Do not ask me any questions. And I need the number for the best federal defense attorney in your firm. My father-in-law just tried to use my name to wash $5 million of offshore tax evasion money, and the Department of Justice is already involved. Freeze all my joint accounts immediately." His voice faded as he pushed through the front entrance of the restaurant, leaving the heavy glass doors swinging in his wake. Inside the room, the silence was absolutely deafening. The perfect image of the Williams family was shattered. Brittany stood completely frozen, staring at the empty wooden doorway. The reality of her new situation was crashing down on her. She had no husband. She had no massive luxury mansion. She had no trust fund. "Oh, my sweet girl," Catherine whimpered, rushing forward on her unsteady legs. My mother reached out to wrap her arms around her favorite daughter, trying to offer the same blind comfort she had provided for 31 years. "It will be okay, Brittany. We will fix this. We will find a way to make it right." For the very first time in her entire life, Brittany violently shoved our mother away. "Do not touch me!" Brittany screamed, her voice raw and jagged. "You cannot fix this, Mom. You and Dad completely ruined my life. You promised me everything, and you gave me dirty money. My husband just left me. I am going to lose my house. My friends are going to read about this in the news, and I will be a complete laughingstock in this city. This is all your fault." Brittany collapsed into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands and sobbing with loud, ugly heaves. Catherine stood there, completely paralyzed, holding her hands over her mouth as she watched her golden child turn against her. The absolute rejection in Brittany's voice was a fatal blow to my mother's fragile ego. The toxic echo chamber they had built to constantly validate each other was officially dead. I watched the entire scene unfold with a cold, detached satisfaction. I had not laid a single finger on them. I had simply brought the truth into the room, and the truth had torn them apart. Richard slowly looked up from his empty plate. The powerful corporate executive was gone. He looked exhausted, entirely drained of his usual aggressive vitality. The veins in his forehead were no longer throbbing with rage. Instead, his skin was pale and his eyes darted frantically around the room as if searching for a hidden exit. He looked at Mr. Donovan, then at the federal injunction sitting in front of me, the document that stripped him of his entire life work. He realized Jamal was gone. The scapegoat had successfully fled the slaughterhouse. There was no one left to take the fall for the $12 million tax debt. The federal agents were going to look directly at the true architect of the fraud. Catherine watched her husband crumble, and the absolute reality of our situation finally pierced through her thick wall of delusion. The money was officially gone. The high society prestige was shattered. The perfect son-in-law had completely defected. There was no one left to manipulate except me. And my mother was a woman who only knew one single survival tactic when she was backed into a corner. She played the ultimate victim. Catherine suddenly let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She clutched her chest right over her expensive designer dress, and her eyes widened in exaggerated horror. She slumped back heavily against the leather upholstery of her chair, letting her head roll to the side. "Oh, my heart!" she wailed, her voice trembling with heavily manufactured agony. "Richard, help me. I cannot breathe. The stress of this horrible night is giving me a massive heart attack. Nora, look at what you are doing to your own mother. Call an ambulance right now. I am dying." Brittany stopped her hysterical crying for a brief second and looked at our mother with wide, terrified eyes. "Mom, what is happening?" Brittany cried out, reaching a trembling hand across the table. "Daddy, do something. Mom is having a medical emergency." Richard did not even look up from his empty plate. He was entirely paralyzed by his own impending federal indictment. He knew Catherine's tricks just as well as I did, but he was too broken to even participate in the charade. I did not reach for my phone. I did not stand up. I simply took another slow sip of my tap water and watched her perform. Beside me, Mr. Donovan casually checked his luxury wristwatch, entirely unimpressed by the dramatic medical emergency unfolding across the table. He had spent years prosecuting white-collar criminals, and he had seen every single pathetic theatrical trick in the book. "Stop the performance." "Mom," I said, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any sympathy. "Your breathing is completely steady. Your skin color is perfectly normal. You are not having a massive heart attack. You are just having a massive temper tantrum because you are finally being held accountable for your own actions for the very first time in your entire life." Catherine let out another loud gasp, pressing her manicured hand harder against her chest. "How can you be so incredibly cold?" she wheezed, squeezing her eyes shut to force out a few fake tears. "I am in agonizing physical pain. You are literally killing me, Nora. You are sending your own mother to an early grave with your vicious jealousy. If you are truly having a severe medical emergency..." "Mom, I can have Mr. Donovan call the paramedics right now," I offered, leaning forward slightly. "But you should probably know that if they transport you to the local hospital, the federal agents will simply follow the ambulance. They will read you your Miranda rights and handcuff you directly to your hospital bed. The choice is entirely yours." The miraculous healing power of federal prison threats was truly a sight to behold. Catherine stopped gasping instantly. Her hands dropped from her chest and she sat up completely straight in her chair. The fake tears evaporated, leaving behind a mask of pure, desperate rage. The medical emergency was officially over, and the emotional blackmail was about to begin. "How can you be so completely heartless?" Catherine hissed, leaning across the table with her eyes narrowing into cruel, vicious slits. "I am your mother, Nora. I gave birth to you. I sacrificed my perfect figure to carry you in my body for 9 months. I fed you and clothed you and put a solid roof over your head when you were too young to do anything for yourself. You owe me your entire life. You are my daughter, and you have a fundamental moral duty to protect your own family." I stared at her, letting her toxic words hang in the air. "A fundamental moral duty," I repeated quietly. "Yes," Catherine snapped, slamming her hand flat against the white tablecloth. "Family comes first. You do not hand your own flesh and blood over to the federal government just because you have a petty little grudge about the past. I made massive sacrifices for you, Nora. I was tough on you because I wanted you to be strong. Everything I did was to prepare you for the harsh realities of the real world. You should be thanking me instead of trying to destroy me." She pointed her finger right at my face, demanding absolute loyalty, just like she always did. "You have the power to stop this right now," Catherine demanded, her voice rising in a frantic crescendo. "Tell your fancy lawyer to rip up those federal documents. Tell the government it was all a massive misunderstanding and that you willingly signed those corporate papers. We are your blood, Nora. You will fix this mess right now because I am your mother and I am telling you to do it. We are your blood, Nora. You will fix this mess right now because I am your mother and I am telling you to do it." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, watching the veins pop out on her neck as she demanded my absolute obedience. She was so entirely convinced that her biological title gave her a VIP pass to destroy my life without any consequences. "You want to talk about being a mother, Mom?" I asked, leaning my forearms heavily against the table. "Let us talk about exactly what being a mother means to you. Let us talk about the spring of my junior year in college, when I was rushed to the emergency room with a severe kidney infection." Catherine stiffened her eyes, darting away from mine for a fraction of a second. "That was a long time ago," she muttered dismissively. "You recovered just fine." "I recovered physically?" I agreed, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp tone. "But then the massive medical bills arrived. I was still on your health insurance policy because I was only 20 years old. The hospital sent the remaining balance of $12,000 directly to this family. A family that lived in a multi-million-dollar estate. A family that threw $20,000 catered holiday parties just to impress the wealthy neighbors right next door." I watched Richard shift uncomfortably in his heavy leather chair. He knew exactly where this was going. "You both completely ignored those hospital bills." I continued, refusing to let them look away from my gaze. "You threw the notices in the trash. You ignored the phone calls from the billing department. And when the hospital finally sent that $12,000 debt to a ruthless collections agency, you completely ignored them too. You let my personal credit score plummet to the low 400s. You let aggressive debt collectors harass me in my tiny college dorm room, calling me at all hours of the night, threatening to garnish the meager wages from my minimum wage campus job." Brittany was sitting silently now, her dramatic tears temporarily pausing as she listened to the harsh reality of our shared past. "I begged you for help," I said, staring directly into Catherine's cold eyes. "I came home for spring break crying because I could not even qualify for a basic student apartment with my destroyed credit history. And do you remember what you told me, Mom? You looked at me across your massive custom marble kitchen island and told me that the family budget was extremely tight that year. You told me I needed to learn how to be financially responsible and handle my own personal debts like a mature adult." Catherine opened her mouth to defend her actions, but I immediately raised my hand to silence her. And the very next day, I said, my voice echoing loudly in the private dining room, I watched Dad back a luxury horse trailer into our grand driveway. The family budget was supposedly so incredibly tight that you could not pay your own daughter's medical bills, but somehow you magically found $85,000 in cold, hard cash to buy Brittany a purebred Dutch warm blood horse. You even bought custom monogrammed blankets for the animal. Brittany flinched, looking down at her manicured hands, unable to meet my eyes. She needed that horse for her elite equestrian club. Catherine blurted out, her face flushing an angry, defensive red. It was a crucial networking opportunity for her future. You were just dealing with a minor hospital bill. You did not need the money as badly as she needed that horse to secure her high society social standing. A minor hospital bill, I repeated, the absolute absurdity of her logic hanging heavily in the tense air. You let my financial reputation get entirely destroyed and forced me to work 3 separate jobs while taking a full university course load just so my younger sister could ride a designer animal around an exclusive country club. I ate cheap canned soup for 3 years and got denied for every single basic car loan I applied for, while you bought custom leather saddles and hired private stable boys to brush a horse. I sat back in my chair looking at the 3 of them with pure, unadulterated disgust. Do not ever use the word family with me again. Your definition of family is just a cruel hierarchy of who gets the luxury lifestyle and who gets the garbage. You designated me as the garbage the day I was born. You never protected me. You never nurtured me. You just expected me to take the hits so Brittany could shine brightly. Now you will face the massive consequences of your actions alone. My words hung in the air like a final verdict. The private dining room was suffocatingly quiet save for Brittany's muffled sobs. Catherine stared at me, completely unable to muster another fake tear or manipulative guilt trip. I had stripped away their carefully constructed narrative of the benevolent, loving family. There was nowhere left for them to hide. But Richard was a man who had spent 40 years believing he was the undisputed king of his universe. When cornered kings do not apologize, they attack. The transformation was terrifyingly fast. All the color that had drained from my father's face suddenly came rushing back in a violent, dark red flush. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his expensive silk collar. He let out a primal, guttural roar that sounded more animal than human. "You ungrateful, vicious little witch!" he bellowed, slamming both of his heavy fists onto the dining table with such explosive force that my water glass tipped over entirely. The ice cubes scattered across the white linen and the water pooled around the base of the crystal vase. Before anyone could react, Richard launched his massive frame out of his chair. He did not walk around the table like Jamal had. He leaned his entire upper body across the center of it, crushing the expensive floral arrangement and knocking over plates of cold, untouched steak. His eyes were wide and crazed, fixed entirely on the thick stack of federal court documents resting directly in front of me. "Give me those papers!" Richard snarled, his voice completely unrecognizable. It was raw and jagged, filled with the sheer panic of a man watching his empire burn to the ground. "If I destroy the physical order, they cannot execute the freeze. I will shred them. I will burn them. You will not take my company." His massive hands clawed frantically at the white tablecloth, trying to reach the blue sealed documents. He was completely irrational. His desperate brain actually believed that tearing up a piece of paper in a steakhouse would somehow erase a federal injunction already logged in the United States District Court database. That was the absolute peak of his narcissistic delusion. He thought reality only existed if he allowed it to exist. I did not flinch. I did not scream or push my chair back. I simply placed my hands flat firmly over the stack of federal papers, pinning them to the table. "You are embarrassing yourself, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. Dropping the title of Dad felt incredibly liberating. It was the final severing of our toxic bond. Tearing up a piece of paper will not stop the Department of Justice from seizing your bank accounts. It will just add a destruction of evidence charge to your rapidly growing list of federal felonies. But he was completely beyond the reach of logic. "Let go of them," he roared, his face twisting into a mask of pure, vicious hatred. His heavy hand clamped down violently over my left wrist. His thick fingers dug into my skin with crushing, bone-bruising force. For the very first time in my 34 years of life, my father was using direct physical violence against me. He yanked my arm, twisting my wrist, trying to force me to release my grip on the documents. The physical pain was sharp and sudden, but the emotional clarity it provided was absolute. Any tiny, lingering shred of daughterly guilt I might have harbored deep in my subconscious was instantly vaporized by his brutal grip. He was willing to physically break my bones just to protect his stolen money. He was willing to maim his own child to maintain his fake luxury lifestyle. "Richard, stop it!" Catherine screamed, finally snapping out of her paralyzed state. She jumped out of her chair, her designer dress snagging on the armrest. "You are hurting her. The restaurant staff will call the police. We cannot afford a public assault charge tonight." "Shut up, Catherine!" Richard bellowed, not even looking at her. He kept his crazed eyes locked entirely on me, his hot breath smelling of expensive scotch and pure desperation. "Let go of the papers, Nora. I will break your damn arm. I built this family. I own you. You belong to me, and you will obey me right now." He yanked harder, his fingernails digging deep into my flesh, drawing tiny drops of blood. The stack of federal documents shifted slightly, sliding across the damp tablecloth. He let out a wild, triumphant grunt, thinking he was finally winning. He thought brute force would secure his victory, just like it always had in his ruthless corporate dealings. He thought he could just bully his way out of a federal indictment by physically overpowering his own daughter in a public restaurant. He thought he was untouchable, but he was about to learn that the law did not care about his massive ego or his expensive suits. Before he could twist my arm any further, a large hand clamped down hard on Richard's shoulder. It was not a violent strike, but the sheer iron grip of it made my father freeze instantly. Mr. Donovan had moved around the table with terrifying speed and precision. The lawyer did not yell or raise his voice. He simply leaned down until his face was inches from Richard's ear. "I strongly suggest you release her wrist right now, Richard." Mr. Donovan whispered, his voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "You are currently assaulting a cooperating federal witness in the middle of a public restaurant. Under Title 18 of the United States Code Section 1512, using physical force against a witness to delay or prevent the communication of information to a federal judge or law enforcement officer is a Class B felony. That specific charge alone carries a mandatory consecutive sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison." Richard stopped pulling. His chest was still heaving with erratic, ragged breaths, but the crazed animalistic fire in his eyes began to flicker out. The heavy legal terminology poured over him like a bucket of ice water, extinguishing his blind rage. "And since you have actually drawn blood," Donovan continued, his tone perfectly conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. Donovan pointed a steady finger at the small red crescent marks where my father's nails had dug into my skin. "We can easily add aggravated battery to the federal indictment. That is another 5 to 10 years added directly to whatever sentence you receive for the $12 million tax evasion and the massive wire fraud. You are already looking at dying in a federal penitentiary, Richard. Do you really want to make sure you spend your final years in solitary confinement?" The fight drained out of my father in an instant. The massive, intimidating corporate giant rapidly shrank back into a terrified, pathetic old man. His thick fingers slowly uncurled from my arm, trembling uncontrollably. He stumbled backward away from the table, his knees hitting his heavy leather chair. He collapsed into the seat, burying his face in his large hands. He did not say a word. The only sound coming from him was a hollow, ragged breathing that sounded entirely defeated. I pulled my arm back and smoothed my sleeve down over my bruised wrist. I did not rub the injury or show any sign of physical pain. I simply adjusted my posture and looked at the three of them. The absolute shift in power was complete. I was no longer the scapegoat daughter begging for scraps of affection or financial security. I was the one holding the keys to their entire existence. Mr. Donovan stepped back from Richard's chair and calmly adjusted his suit jacket. He reached down and picked up the thick stack of federal court documents that Richard had tried so desperately to destroy. Donovan meticulously tapped the edges of the heavy parchment against the table, aligning the pages perfectly. He placed them securely back inside his black leather briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. The sharp metallic click echoed in the silent room, signaling the absolute end of the Williams family empire. The paperwork was secure and the legal trap was entirely locked in place. There was nothing left to debate. Catherine was staring at Richard's defeated form with pure, unadulterated horror. The man who had provided her with endless luxury and shielded her from every single consequence was now completely broken. She slowly turned her head to look at me, her eyes wide and pleading. She realized that her fake heart attacks and her toxic maternal guilt trips were entirely useless against the cold, hard reality of federal law. "Nora, please," Catherine whispered, her voice trembling so badly it was barely audible. "We will give you whatever you want. If you want the company, you can have it. If you want the Lake Forest house, you can take it. Just please do not let them send us to prison. We are too old to survive in a place like that. I will do anything you ask. Just please call off the federal agents." I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing for her pathetic begging. "You still do not understand how any of this works, Mom," I said, shaking my head slowly. "You cannot negotiate your way out of a federal indictment by offering me stolen property. The company already belongs to me. The trust funds are already frozen. I did not call the Department of Justice to blackmail you into treating me better. I called them because you committed massive felonies and tried to use my name to cover your tracks. There is no secret deal we can make tonight. The avalanche has already started and you are standing directly in its path. The avalanche has already started and you are standing directly in its path. My words hung in the suffocating air of the private dining room, sealing their fate entirely. Catherine stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, finally grasping that her tears and maternal guilt trips held absolutely no currency here. The luxurious world she had lorded over me for my entire life was effectively dead. Right on cue, the heavy mahogany doors creaked open for the third time tonight, but it was not the terrified young waiter returning to the room. It was the general manager of the Monarch. He was a tall, impeccably groomed man in a sharp black tuxedo, and he carried a sleek leather checkbook folder. His expression was a perfect mask of high-end hospitality, but his eyes darted quickly around the chaotic room, taking in the spilled water, the crushed floral centerpiece, and my father's violently flushed face. "Excuse me, Mr. Williams," the manager said, his tone perfectly measured and polite. "I deeply apologize for the interruption during your birthday celebration, but there seems to be a slight issue with the payment method your son-in-law left on the table earlier." The manager stepped forward and gently placed Jamal's black premium credit card onto the white tablecloth. Jamal canceled that card the second he walked out the front door, I noted, silently watching the manager's polite, professional smile. Richard blinked, trying to process this mundane interruption amidst the catastrophic destruction of his empire. He let out a ragged breath and smoothed his hands over his expensive suit jacket, desperately trying to rebuild his fractured facade of wealth and power. "It is fine," Richard muttered, his voice hoarse and completely lacking its usual booming authority. "My son-in-law had a sudden emergency and had to leave abruptly. I will cover the bill myself." My father reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out his heavy designer wallet. He extracted a sleek metal premium credit card and handed it to the manager with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Just run that one and bring the receipt back quickly," he ordered, attempting to sound like the king of the room once again. "Add a generous 20% tip for the inconvenience." "Of course, sir," the manager replied, taking the metal card. He pulled a handheld point of sale terminal from his jacket pocket right there at the table. He inserted the thick metal card into the reader. The machine beeped softly, processing the transaction over the restaurant's secure wireless network. We waited in silence. The only sound was Brittany's quiet, hiccuping sobs. The machine let out a sharp, harsh double beep. The screen flashed bright red. "I am very sorry, Mr. Williams," the manager said, keeping his voice low to preserve my father's dignity. "This card has been declined. Would you like me to try another payment method?" "Declined." Richard snapped his brow, furrowing in genuine confusion. "That is completely impossible. There is no preset spending limit on that account, and the balance is paid in full every single month. Run the damn thing again. You probably inserted it backward." The manager did not argue. He simply removed the card and inserted it again. The machine immediately let out the exact same harsh double beep. The screen flashed red once more. "It is definitely declined, sir," the manager confirmed, his professional smile tightening just a fraction. Richard snatched the metal card back, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He ripped his wallet open and pulled out a different card. "Here, run this one," he demanded, shoving it toward the manager. "Your machine must be malfunctioning." The manager inserted the second card. Beep, beep, red screen. "Decline," the manager stated, his tone growing slightly colder. Richard was hyperventilating now. He threw his wallet onto the table, spilling a half-dozen premium credit cards across the damp white linen. "Run the corporate card," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at a gold business card. "Run the business account. Run all of them until one works." The manager patiently picked up the gold corporate card. The very account tied directly to Apex Holdings and Williams Commercial Real Estate. He inserted it into the terminal. Beep, beep, red screen. He picked up a silver premium bank card. Beep, beep, red screen. He tried every single piece of plastic my father owned. Every single one of them was instantly and completely rejected. "Sir, I have tried every card," the manager finally said, stepping back from the table and placing the entire stack of useless plastic next to my father's empty plate. "Every single account is registering as frozen or completely suspended by the issuing banks. The total for tonight is $8,500. Do you have an alternate way to settle this bill? Perhaps a bank wire or cash?" Richard stared at the pile of rejected credit cards. His mouth hung slightly open. The reality of the federal injunction had finally materialized in a way he could not ignore or argue his way out of. The Department of Justice had moved with terrifying speed. Every single dollar he had stolen, every account he had hidden, and every line of credit he had ever opened was instantly severed. Catherine let out a whimpering sound, digging into her designer purse. She pulled out her own credit cards, but her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped them onto the floor. "It does not matter, Mom," I said quietly, watching her scramble on the expensive carpet. "Your names are tied to the exact same frozen assets. You are completely locked out of the financial system. You have absolutely nothing. You have absolutely nothing." Richard let out a sharp bark of denial. "Shut up, Nora." He spat, his hands shaking violently as he reached across the table. He grabbed Catherine's expensive designer purse right out of her lap. Catherine let out a startled cry, trying to pull the bag back, but Richard overpowered her easily. "Give it to me," he growled, his eyes wild with a manic desperation. "You have your own separate accounts, Catherine. The federal government cannot possibly freeze your personal retail cards in under an hour. It takes days to process that kind of paperwork." He upended the heavy leather bag directly over the center of the dining table. A chaotic mess of luxury cosmetics, gold-plated compacts, breath mints, and a thick designer wallet spilled out onto the white linen. The loud clatter of expensive items hitting the hardwood table echoed in the quiet room. The general manager took a discreet step back, his professional facade slipping just a fraction to reveal his deep discomfort with this completely undignified display. Richard ignored the manager and ignored his weeping wife. He tore open Catherine's wallet and began ripping out every single piece of plastic he could find. He shoved a handful of cards toward the manager. "Here," Richard demanded, his voice cracking under the intense strain. "Run these. Run the department store cards. Run the local credit union card. Run everything." The manager sighed softly, a sound of pure pity that clearly wounded Richard's massive ego more than any insult ever could. "Very well, sir," the manager replied, picking up the first card from the messy pile. He inserted a silver rewards card into the handheld terminal. The machine thought for a second before letting out that same harsh double beep. The screen flashed bright red. "Declined," the manager stated. "Try the next one," Richard commanded, slamming his fist on the table. The manager patiently picked up a black retail card and inserted it. Beep, beep. Declined. He picked up a platinum travel card. Beep, beep. Declined. One by one, the manager systematically processed Catherine's entire financial life. Every single attempt was met with the exact same unforgiving electronic rejection. The federal injunction had been meticulously thorough. Mr. Donovan's legal team had clearly mapped out every single hidden account, joint checking line of credit, and emergency fund my parents possessed. They were completely financially paralyzed. "Sir, there are no more cards to try," the manager said, placing the terminal back into his jacket pocket. "Every account associated with your family name has been restricted." Richard turned his frantic gaze toward his youngest daughter. "Brittany!" he barked, snapping his fingers at her. "Give me your credit card. Hand it over right now." Brittany shrank back into her chair, shaking her head as tears streamed down her ruined makeup. "I do not have any money, Daddy," she sobbed, her voice high and panicked. "Jamal handles all our finances. He took the main credit card when he walked out. The only card I have in my purse is directly tied to the family trust account, and you just saw that one get declined. I am completely broke. You are entirely useless." Richard hissed, completely abandoning the loving father persona he had worn just an hour ago. He was a drowning man looking for anyone to stand on, so he could catch a breath of air. The manager cleared his throat, gently attempting to regain control of his private dining room. Mr. Williams, the total for the evening is $8,500. If you cannot produce a valid form of payment immediately, I will be forced to contact the local authorities. Defrauding a restaurant of this magnitude is a serious criminal offense in the city of Chicago. The threat of calling the local police hit Richard like a physical blow. He remembered exactly what Mr. Donovan had said earlier. An active federal warrant was already in the system. If the local police arrived to investigate a skipped restaurant bill, they would run his identification. They would see the federal alert and he would be arrested in handcuffs right here in the lobby of the Monarch in front of his wealthy peers. No. Richard gasped, holding his hands up defensively. No police. Do not call the police. There has to be some kind of misunderstanding. I am Richard Williams. I own half the commercial real estate in this district. You know who I am. I know who you were, sir. The manager replied, his tone losing the last shred of high-end hospitality. But right now you are a patron who cannot pay his bill. The absolute humiliation was complete. The wealthy, powerful Williams family was sitting in a five-star restaurant surrounded by the remnants of a wildly expensive feast, and they could not even scrape together the money to pay for it. They were entirely penniless. Richard slumped back in his chair, staring at the ceiling in complete defeat. He looked at the half-empty bottle of expensive vintage champagne that Catherine had ordered just to spite me. The luxurious liquid now represented nothing but a criminal charge waiting to happen. Catherine buried her face in her empty hands, unable to look at the manager or the ruined table. The high society matron who judged everyone by their bank accounts was now completely destitute. I sat there in my simple navy dress and watched them burn. For decades they had wielded their immense wealth like a heavy club, beating me down every time I tried to stand up. They used money to manipulate, to control, and to punish. Now that exact same weapon had been completely stripped away, leaving them utterly defenseless. The manager stood there holding the stack of rejected plastic, his posture rigid and unforgiving. I will give you 5 minutes to contact someone who can settle this account. Mr. Williams, the manager said, his voice devoid of patience. If the balance is not paid in full by then, I am locking the doors and calling the police. Richard did not try to argue with him. He simply stared at his empty hands, a broken man, realizing he had no allies left to call. His country club friends would run away the second they heard the words federal injunction. Jamal was already gone. Brittany was now penniless. Catherine was completely useless. I let them sit in that agonizing, humiliating silence for a full minute. I watched the sheer panic wash over their faces as they visualized themselves being led out of the Monarch in handcuffs for a petty dine and dash charge. Then I slowly opened my simple leather clutch. I reached inside and pulled out a heavy matte black metal card. It was an exclusive invitation, only Centurion card. The kind of credit card that required millions of dollars in annual spending just to maintain the account. I had earned it 2 years ago after my forensic accounting firm successfully recovered $60 million for a defrauded tech conglomerate. I did not rely on offshore shell companies or stolen identities to build my wealth. I earned every single penny by exposing criminals just like my father. I placed the heavy black card onto the manager's silver tray. The solid metal clinked sharply against the tray, drawing the eyes of everyone at the table. I will take care of the bill, I said, my voice calm and perfectly steady. Please add a generous $2,000 tip for your staff. I apologize for the massive disturbance my former family has caused your establishment tonight. The manager looked at the black card and then up at me. His professional demeanor instantly returned. Thank you very much, Ms. Williams, he replied, bowing his head slightly. I will process this immediately. Richard stared at the black card as the manager walked away. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Catherine looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. Brittany stopped crying. Her red, swollen eyes locked onto the spot where my card had just been. They had spent my entire life convincing themselves that I was a pathetic failure who would always be beneath them. Seeing the ultimate symbol of elite wealth emerge from my purse completely shattered the fragile reality they built. "Where did you get that?" Richard finally choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "You run a tiny office in a strip mall. You drive a 10-year-old car. You cannot possibly afford a card like that." "I drive a 10-year-old car because it runs perfectly fine, and I do not need a depreciating asset to stroke my ego," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "And my tiny office in the strip mall is actually the headquarters of a highly specialized forensic accounting firm that contracts directly with the Department of Justice and several major Fortune 500 companies. I make more money in a single quarter than your fraudulent real estate company makes in an entire year, Dad. I just never felt the desperate need to flaunt it to validate my own existence." I looked at the three of them sitting among the ruins of their expensive dinner. "You spent 34 years trying to convince me that I was entirely worthless." I continued, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "You mocked my clothes, my apartment, and my career. You tried to make me believe that the only way to have value in this world was to be exactly like you, arrogant, greedy, and completely devoid of empathy. You thought if you kept me small and insecure, I would eventually crawl back to you begging for a place in your toxic kingdom." I stood up from the table, smoothing down my simple navy dress. "But you were completely wrong," I said, looking down at my father. "My worth was never defined by your approval. My value is not attached to your stolen money or your fake country club status. I built a beautiful, honest life entirely without you. And the most pathetic part is that you were so blinded by your own narcissism that you never even realized how powerful I had become until it was far too late." The manager returned silently, placing the leather checkbook folder on the table. I picked up the pen, signed the receipt with a steady hand, and took my black card back. "This meal is entirely on me," I announced, looking at Richard one last time. "Consider it a final parting gift. Because where you are going tomorrow, they do not serve Wagyu steak and vintage champagne. You spent your whole life feeding off others. Now it is your turn to pay the ultimate price." My words hung in the suffocating air, just as a sudden sharp change in the ambient lighting caught my eye. The Monarch was located on the ground floor of a massive downtown Chicago high-rise, featuring beautiful floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the busy city street. All evening, those massive windows had displayed the steady stream of luxury cars and yellow taxicabs, but now the calm yellow glow of the streetlights was abruptly fractured. A rapid, rhythmic strobing effect washed over the expensive glass. It was a chaotic mix of bright flashing blue and piercing red lights bouncing wildly off the crystal chandeliers inside the dining room. There were no loud sirens. The authorities had clearly coordinated a quiet approach to avoid causing a massive stampede of wealthy patrons fleeing the establishment. But the sheer number of flashing lights reflecting against the mahogany walls made it entirely obvious that this was not a simple traffic stop. It was a highly coordinated federal raid. Richard turned his head slowly toward the window. The strobing red and blue lights illuminated his pale face, highlighting every single deep wrinkle and age line he had tried so hard to hide. The reality of his impending doom finally broke through his thick wall of pure narcissism. He let out a strange, high-pitched wheezing sound, pressing his large hands flat against the white tablecloth, as if trying to anchor himself to the earth. Catherine let out a blood-curdling shriek. She scrambled backward in her chair, knocking it hard into the wooden wall. "No!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet elegance of the restaurant. "Tell them to go away, Richard. Do something immediately. Call the mayor. Call the governor. You know important people in this city. You donate to their political campaigns. Tell them to stop this right now before we are completely humiliated." But Richard could not do anything. He could not buy his way out of this nightmare. His political connections were entirely useless when his bank accounts were permanently frozen, and his name was attached to a $12 million federal tax evasion case. Out in the main dining room, the soft jazz music abruptly cut off. A heavy wave of murmurs and startled gasps rolled through the crowd. I looked through the open double doors of our private VIP room and watched the heavy glass entrance doors of the Monarch swing wide open. A team of 6 men and women walked briskly into the elegant lobby. They were not local Chicago police officers in standard blue uniforms. They wore dark tailored suits and dark navy windbreakers with large bright yellow letters printed boldly across their backs. FBI. The federal agents moved with terrifying efficiency. They did not shout or draw their weapons, but their presence completely dominated the room. The wealthy socialites and powerful business executives sitting at the surrounding tables immediately shrank back into their leather booths, lowering their eyes and pulling their expensive coats tightly around their shoulders. Nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire of a federal law enforcement raid. The general manager of the restaurant wisely stepped back, pressing himself flat against the hallway wall and gesturing politely toward our private room to guide them. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with closely cropped gray hair and a stern, uncompromising expression, walked directly through the mahogany doors of our room. He was followed closely by 3 other agents whose eyes scanned the space with tactical precision. The lead agent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, flipping it open to display a shining gold badge. Richard Williams and Catherine Williams, the lead agent announced, his deep voice projecting absolute authority over the chaotic room. I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have federal warrants for your immediate arrest. My father tried to stand up, but his legs completely gave out beneath him. He crashed heavily back into his leather chair, knocking over his empty water glass. This is a massive mistake, Richard stammered, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper. I am a prominent businessman. I have top-tier lawyers. I demand to speak to my legal counsel immediately. Your legal counsel has already been formally notified of the federal indictment. Special Agent Miller replied, completely unfazed by the fading bluster of a ruined corporate giant. You are being charged with multiple counts of aggravated identity theft, international wire fraud, and massive federal tax evasion. Catherine burst into hysterical sobbing, grabbing onto the edge of the dining table as 2 agents approached her chair. I am completely innocent, Catherine wailed loudly. We have the right person, ma'am, the second agent stated, pulling out heavy steel handcuffs. Please stand up now. We have the right person, ma'am, the second agent stated, pulling out heavy steel handcuffs. Please stand up now. Catherine pressed her back against the expensive leather chair, shaking her head so violently that her perfectly styled hair fell into a tangled mess around her face. I am not going anywhere with you, she shrieked, kicking her expensive designer heels against the hardwood floor. I am a respectable woman. You cannot treat me like a common criminal in front of my peers. The female FBI agent did not hesitate or argue. She grabbed Catherine's arm with practiced tactical efficiency, pulling my mother out of the chair in one fluid motion. Catherine let out a breathless gasp as her arms were forcibly twisted behind her back. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly, the metallic ratcheting sound echoing sharply over my mother's hysterical sobs. The luxurious high society matron was completely erased, leaving behind a terrified woman bound in cold iron chains. Special Agent Miller turned his attention directly to my father. Stand up and place your hands behind your back. Mr. Williams Miller commanded his tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or delay. Richard did not fight. The sheer overwhelming magnitude of his failure had completely crushed his fighting spirit. The massive corporate titan who had spent his entire life bullying everyone around him simply went entirely limp. He pushed himself up slowly, his knees visibly trembling under his own weight. As he turned around to present his wrists to the federal agent, he looked directly at me. There was no rage left in his eyes. There was only the hollow, empty stare of a man who realized he had built his entire empire on a foundation of sand, and I had just summoned the ocean. The cuffs snapped tightly around Richard's wrists, locking him into his new reality. Special Agent Miller began reciting the Miranda rights, his steady, authoritative voice cutting through the chaotic noise of the private dining room. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Every single word felt like a heavy iron nail being driven into the coffin of the Williams family legacy. Brittany could no longer handle the destruction unfolding in front of her. She slid completely out of her chair, collapsing onto the damp, ruined dining room floor. "Daddy, please," she wailed, crawling on her hands and knees toward our restrained father. "You cannot leave me here. Jamal is gone. The money is gone. I do not know what to do. You promised you would always take care of me." Richard could not even reach out to comfort his golden child. His hands were bound tightly behind his back. He just stared down at her, offering absolutely nothing. The illusion of his omnipotent protection was entirely shattered. Brittany spun around on the carpet, looking up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Nora, please," she begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched shriek. "You have money. You have that black credit card. Please hire them a defense lawyer. Please help me keep my house. We are sisters, Nora. You cannot just let them take everything away from us." I looked down at the younger sister who had spent 31 years actively participating in my emotional destruction. "You are right, Brittany," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "We are sisters, but you only remembered that fact the exact second you needed my money to save your fake luxury lifestyle. You made your choices. You chose to live on stolen funds. You chose to humiliate your husband. And you chose to stand by while they tried to frame me for a federal crime. I am not your safety net. You are completely on your own now." I turned away from her sobbing form. Special Agent Miller placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder, guiding him forcefully toward the door. The second agent pulled a weeping Catherine along right behind him. The private dining room doors swung wide open, revealing the brutal gauntlet they now had to walk. The entire five-star restaurant was dead silent. Every single wealthy patron, every high-powered executive, and every socialite in the building was standing completely still, watching the prominent Richard and Catherine Williams, being perp, walked through the main dining room in federal handcuffs. The absolute public humiliation was worse than any prison sentence they could ever serve. Their carefully curated image was publicly butchered for all of Chicago high society to witness. Mr. Donovan picked up his black leather briefcase and gave me a respectful nod. "Outstanding work tonight, Mrs. Williams," he said quietly. "I will see you at the federal courthouse on Monday to finalize the asset transfer." I thanked him and picked up my simple leather clutch. I did not look back at the ruined table. I did not look at Brittany, weeping on the floor, surrounded by unpaid bills and spilled water. I walked out of the private room, keeping my head held high. I followed the path the federal agents had cleared, stepping out through the heavy glass doors of the Monarch and into the cool, crisp Chicago night air. I took a deep breath of actual freedom. The toxic chains were finally broken, and I was never looking back. I took a deep breath of actual freedom. The toxic chains were finally broken, and I was never looking back. Exactly 1 year has passed since that explosive night at the Monarch. Today, I am standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner penthouse office. It is located on the top floor of the very same downtown Chicago high-rise that my father once claimed as his corporate throne. I did not keep his fraudulent real estate company. I liquidated the compromised assets, paid the massive federal tax debts he left behind, and used the remaining clean capital to expand my forensic accounting firm into a national powerhouse. I took the very empire he used to belittle me and transformed it into a fortress of absolute transparency and justice. My parents did not fare as well. Without their stolen millions, they could not afford the aggressive legal defense team Richard had always bragged about. They were appointed public defenders who strongly advised them to take a plea deal. Richard and Catherine Williams, the former king and queen of Chicago high society, are currently serving concurrent 10-year sentences in a minimum security federal correctional institution. There are no vintage champagnes or designer dresses in federal prison. My mother spends her days working in the prison laundry facility, folding scratchy uniforms, while my father mops the cafeteria floors. They write to me occasionally begging for commissary money or a character reference for early parole. I return every single letter completely unopened. Brittany lost the Lake Forest mansion before she ever even moved in. With the trust funds entirely frozen and Jamal gone, she was forced to face the harsh reality of actual adulthood for the very first time. She currently lives in a small studio apartment on the outskirts of the city and works as a receptionist at a mid-level dental clinic. She has called me several times crying about her electric bills and her sore feet. I block her new numbers just as quickly as she buys burner phones. Jamal finalized his divorce 6 months ago. He lost his luxury cars and his expensive suits, but he kept his real estate license and his freedom. He works at a modest brokerage firm in the suburbs, now rebuilding his life one honest sale at a time. We do not speak, but I respect his quiet resilience. Sometimes I look out over the beautiful Chicago skyline and reflect on the absolute absurdity of my past life. For 34 years, I allowed people who fundamentally despised me to dictate my self-worth. I let my mother convince me that I was unlovable. I let my father convince me that I was a financial burden. I let my sister convince me that I was invisible. But standing here today, I realize the most important lesson I have ever learned. Biology is merely a genetic coincidence. It is not a binding contract to endure endless emotional abuse. Just because someone shares your DNA does not give them the right to destroy your mental health or sabotage your future. Setting firm boundaries with toxic family members is often viewed as a selfish act by a society that constantly preaches unconditional family loyalty. But there is absolutely nothing selfish about protecting your peace. There is no virtue in allowing narcissistic parents to use you as a human shield for their own failures. If you are the scapegoat of your family, I want you to listen to me very carefully right now. The way they treat you is not a reflection of your inherent value. It is a massive projection of their own deep insecurities and hidden flaws. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into their dysfunctional narrative. You have the power to walk away from the table. You have the right to demand respect, and you have the absolute authority to build a life that is entirely yours. It will be terrifying at first. The guilt they programmed into you will try to pull you back. But once you break those chains, you will discover a level of freedom and success you never thought possible. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your own sanity? Did you ever discover a hidden family secret that changed your entire perspective on your childhood? I want to hear your stories of resilience and survival in the comments below. Let us build a community of people who refuse to be defined by the trauma of their past. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of personal triumph. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with a toxic family dynamic right now. The story of my family and their ultimate downfall taught me a profound lesson about the true nature of loyalty and self-worth. For my entire life, I was told that family is everything. Society conditions us to believe that sharing DNA means we must automatically endure any level of mistreatment. My parents and my sister used the concept of family not as a bond of unconditional love, but as a weapon of manipulation. They expected absolute obedience and infinite forgiveness simply because we shared the same last name. But I learned the hard way that a biological connection is never an acceptable excuse for financial or emotional abuse. The most liberating realization I had during this entire ordeal was that my personal value did not depend on the approval of people who fundamentally despised me. When you are positioned as the family scapegoat, you often internalize the cruel things said about you. You start to secretly believe you are the problem. Stepping away from that highly toxic environment allowed me to see the absolute truth. I was never broken or unworthy. I was simply surviving in a space that was specifically designed to break me down so others could feel powerful. Setting firm boundaries and walking away from toxic blood relatives is not an act of betrayal. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You do not owe your life, your money, or your sanity to people who only want to use you for their own selfish gain. Building a beautiful, successful life outside of their dark shadow is the greatest testament to your own inner strength. Please share your own story in the comments below if you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your